So welcome everybody. We're getting started now that it's 2 p.m. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Hannah Rowe and I'm the 2020 Census Manager for the Austin Asian Complete Count Committee. Thank you all for joining us today for this important and timely live stream conversation with three very distinguished Asian American leaders in our community. This is an interactive webinar, so we invite everyone to submit your questions and comments right here on this page. We'll first have the opportunity to hear from our speakers for the first half hour, and then we'll save around 10 minutes towards the end to answer your questions and have an open discussion. So this month, we are celebrating Asian American Pacific Islanders and the immense diversity of our cultures, our languages, ethnicities, and our life stories that we have all woven into the fabric of our society. So while we're diverse, we also have a shared history. As immigrants, as children of immigrants, we have held multiple identities and traditions in carving out our lives here in America. We're not alone in this journey, and we need each other in claiming our sense of belonging here, especially in this precarious time where we are witnessing the scapegoating of Asian Americans during the pandemic. One of the most powerful things we can do is to tell our stories based on our lived experiences. AAPI Heritage Month is an opportunity for us to understand our history, the role that Asian Americans have played in this country, and why it's so important for us to be more involved in civic engagement. Our stories matter, our voices matter, and this year with the census, we have this immense opportunity to show up and be counted. No matter how long we have been here, everyone counts. So before we begin, I'd like to introduce the work of the Austin Asian Complete Count Committee, or the AACCC. The AACCC was formed to ensure a complete count of all Asian American Pacific Islanders in the greater Austin area in Travis and Williamson counties. We aim to engage, inform, and motivate the AAPI community in Greater Austin to participate in the 2020 census. We believe that civic participation can truly empower all of our communities. We're so proud to be working in coalition with the Black African American Complete Count Committee, the Hispanic Latinx Complete Count Committee, and the LGBTQ+ Complete Count Committee. All of the Complete Count Committees are working tirelessly to ensure that each and every one of us gets counted so that all of our communities can have the resources needed for the next 10 years. So I'm truly honored to be moderating this conversation with three very distinguished Asian American leaders in our community who have dedicated their lives to public service. Growing up, I did not see too many Asian Americans represented in public life and in positions of influence. So I'm so thankful for our speakers who have been modeling the social courage and leadership that means so much to our community and to the next generation of Asian American Pacific Islander leaders. So without further ado, it is my great privilege to introduce you all to our speakers today. So panelists, if you can also make sure that you are unmuted at this time. Okay, so we'll begin with Arati Singh. So Arati, if you could say hello and wave to our audience, to our viewers.
Hello. How's everyone doing?
Thank you, Arati. Arati Singh is the first Asian American trustee for the Austin Independent School District. Elected in 2018, she serves as an at-large position, which is a citywide position representing 80,000 students, 12,000 employees, and 130 schools. She's a former teacher and is now a program evaluator for STEM and college readiness programs. Arati, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And next we have Pooja Sethi. Pooja, could you wave and say hello to our viewers?
Hi, how's everyone doing? Is my video on?
Not yet. If you could turn your video on, that would be great. And I can also see if I can help with that.
I think the host has to disable it.
Okay. All right, here. Great.
Hi, how's everyone doing?
So Pooja has advocated and spoken up for others throughout her career. She brings a voice of equity, innovative thinking, and passion to the Austin community. She's a proud daughter of South Asian immigrants and grew up hearing her father say, "No matter what, hard work pays off." As a mother, attorney, local business owner, and a nonprofit founder fighting for survivors of abuse and assault and their children. She exemplifies these values every day. At the end of 2016, Sethi was selected to be on Austin City Council Commission, where she advocated for better transportation for seniors, organized town halls to hear the issues community members faced, and push for increased safety for women and children. Pooja currently serves on a variety of city committees and task forces to champion the rights of first responders, advocate for education for all, and support environmental initiatives because she strongly believes in an Austin that is safe, healthy, and green for everyone. Pooja, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, we also have Judge Nick Chu. Nick, if you can wave and say hello.
Hi.
So Nick became the Justice of the Peace for Precinct 5 in Central Travis County in May of 2017. Previously, Judge Chu served as an assistant district attorney with the Travis County District Attorney's Office. He had also served as a chief misdemeanor prosecutor with the Travis County Attorney's Office. Judge Chu is a community activist and has a long history of local leadership. He's a proud son of immigrants and the grandson of the owner of the first Chinese restaurant in Grapevine, Texas. He was raised in Grapevine and is a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin, where he received his BA in government. He earned his law degree from Baylor Law School. Judge Chu is Travis County's first Asian American Justice of the Peace. Nick and his wife live in Austin with their baby daughter. Thank you so much, Nick, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I thought we could begin our panel today by hearing from each of you about your own journey. So for a couple of minutes each, can you share your own personal journey and how you came to your commitment to public service? How has your Asian American Pacific Islander heritage shaped who you are, your values, and your experience? So we'll begin with you, Arati.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I think my journey probably actually started out as an act of rebellion a little bit, because I grew up in a loving but fairly traditional Indian household in mostly North Carolina. And when I went to college my freshman year, I thought, what can I do that's going to really annoy my parents the most this summer? And I thought about, I went to Mexico for a summer and did some volunteer work in a village where we built latrines. And this was before cell phones and internet and all that. And so, of course, they were scared to death to send me off, but they let me go. And but that ended up being such an eye-opening experience, because I was there for 4 weeks and learned about migrant farm workers, because most of the families in that little village where I was doing volunteer work were migrant farm workers in the US. So they would cross over every year, work the Western Stream, and then send money home. And so that kind of set me on a journey of working with and advocating for migrant farm workers. I ended up teaching for 2 years in South Texas through a program called Teach for America, and that was the one paying job I could get to work with migrant farm workers and their families after college. And so I've just sort of taken that with me over the years in my career in education, and got involved with PTA at my kids' school and kind of climbed the ranks in PTA, and decided one day that it might be a good idea to run for school board. And so here I am. Thank you.
Wow, Pooja, I almost called you Pooja. Arati, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. Nick, how about you?
Yeah, growing up in Grapevine, Texas, if folks don't know, that's kind of in the DFW area. That's where the DFW airport, the city that has the DFW airport's at. And so growing up there in the 90s and early 2000s, there weren't a lot of Asian Americans around there. So my family and a couple of other families were the only ones there. And I kind of learned a lot about my Asian American identity through my family and their times kind of leaving China, going to South Korea to flee the communists, and coming to America as immigrants. So that history has always been a part of me from from just our shared family stories. But you know, part of getting involved in public service was due to the fact that there weren't a lot of Asian Americans in Grapevine, and having a small business, a Chinese restaurant in the city, there were a lot of things that affected us in terms of, you know, different city policies or how the schools done, or small city issues, you know, and so my family taught me at a very young age that if you don't participate, then you kind of cede your voice and your decision making in making ability to others, and you may not be happy with what they decide. And so it was really important for us to participate, just at a very basic level, just to make sure that we had a say. And so, you know, that was always kind of instilled in me, and as I kind of continued my college career and my law school career, I decided that you know, instead of going into private practice or anything like that, that I really enjoyed serving my community. A lot of my work in my early years had been political campaigns and kind of that kind of work. And I thought that as a lawyer, the best way to serve my community was be a prosecutor. So I was a prosecutor with the county attorney's office handling misdemeanors, and then the DA's office handling felony cases, until one day a group of friends of mine approached me and said, "Hey, you know, the justice of the peace that currently has this position, he's going to retire, so you should think about applying and getting the commissioner's court appointment for the unexpired term." And luckily, I had a lot of mentors kind of help me through the way in getting that appointment, and after getting the appointment, winning a 4-year term by election. So it's been kind of one of those things where community service has always been something that I've been very interested in following through.
That's very inspiring, Nick. Thank you so much for sharing. And last but certainly not least, Pooja, could you share your story with us and how you came to public service?
Sure. I was actually born in Saudi Arabia, and we lived in an American compound, in a Aramco American compound. And where I lived, there was maybe 5 Indian families total. And so we were kind of raised to not talk about being Indian or being South Asian, or even not Hindu. So we kind of lived like that, and I was getting used to it. And I remember one day my mom showed up at school in a sari to drop off the house keys. And we usually didn't wear Indian clothes or talk about Diwali or anything in school. So when she showed up, I just remember in the 8th grade, all these kids started making fun of me because of that. And I realized at that point that we lived a very dual lifestyle where, you know, on the weekends, we would celebrate at family friends' homes, like Indian culture and different Indian things. And during the week, we were American, where we, you know, did all American things and wore American clothing. So I think that's kind of where it started. And then fast forward to me having my own son years ago, I realized that I wanted to raise my son in a society where this was all normalized. You know, after coming to this country, I realized that there were still many, many people who celebrated culture on the weekends, but not during the week, and at home and with people who look like us, but not, you know, in schools or out in the community. So that's kind of where I think 8 years ago, I started South Asian Austin Moms, and that was to do cultural events out in the Austin community to kind of, and for the whole Austin community. And we started with Holi and Diwali. And part of that was just to invite all of Austin to come out and celebrate different cultures, so that, you know, we talk about Christmas, Easter, Diwali, you know, everything all together. So that's kind of where my public service started. And then in 2016, there was some backlash against the Asian, South Asian communities, and, you know, what was happening in the country. And I think that my public service has increased since then because of our children. Really is my motivator. Is I want them to be able to grow up and feel safe. So that's where we are.
really appreciate you sharing your story with us. It means a lot to me also just to hear all of your stories and the ways that you know, we've had to hold these identities and traditions as we've carved out our place in this society. So you are all modeling that leadership and courage for my generation for sure, and I know for a fact for the next generation as well. So I thought that we could take this opportunity today to think a little bit more about our collective history. So we all have our own personal histories as well, but you know, we have a shared history as Asian American Pacific Islanders in this country. And so Nick, I'm gonna turn to you for this question.
Sure.
So what are some of the significant achievements of AAPI communities in our collective history, and what roles have we played in America? And maybe you could also speak about the history of Texas, but wherever your thoughts take you on this one. So turn the mic over to you.
Yeah, you know, mine's kind of probably more slanted towards kind of in the law part of it, just based on my practice and profession. But I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of amazing what the Asian American Pacific Islander community has gone through since the history of our nation. You know, just very interestingly enough, back in the Wild West days in the 1800s, there's this famous justice of the peace, Judge Roy Bean, and he said at one point a Chinese railroad worker got murdered by somebody, and he famously said that, you know, I see no a statute in here that says that a Chinese person is a human being, so this can't be murder. So that was kind of the world that existed back in the 1800s for Chinese immigrants and Asian Americans in general. And you flash forward to the Chinese Exclusion Act, and then probably one of the more modern examples is the Japanese internment camps during World War II. But then you kind of see the shift, and it's an amazing shift that some of that otherization goes away. Now, you obviously have plenty of that still today and in our past since then, in terms of hate crimes or racism, and we like almost, I think every group is trying to struggle with that and trying to fight that back. But you see the shift in the later half of the 20th century that kind of focuses on Asian American inclusion in our government, in our decision making bodies, and you see that with, you know, first elected representatives in the House of Representatives and Congress, now the U.S. Senate, places that you wouldn't even expect, like Texas, that would have large Asian American populations, are starting to be representative. We now have Asian American representatives in our state legislature. I believe Houston or Harris County, the third most prevalent language there is Vietnamese at this point. And on the judiciary side, even on the local level, you see these amazing strides. Judge Ramy Coe was the first appointed municipal court judge. Now we have Judge George Thomas in the city of Austin as a judge. Judge Todd Wong was Travis County's first elected judge, and I followed him afterwards. And looking at the 800 justices of the peace, there are two of us now that are Asian American, and so it's been kind of interesting to see. And I think what our community is realizing, and this is, I think, an awakening within our community, is that participation is key, and participation is critical to getting things done, to making change in our community and changing perceptions. And if we are not part of that decision-making ability, then we get shut out. And so I think now, along with the judiciary, along with community activism, we're seeing, I think now we're kind of seeing great strides of Asian Americans participating on the executive government level as well. So, and I think that's going to be our forefront, is more participation, more representation in our government.
Thank you, Nick. So our next question then, and given this history that you have just laid out for us, is we're in this moment now, so we're kind of fast forwarding to today. We're now witnessing this alarming resurgence of AAPI or anti-Asian American Pacific Islander racism. And there is certainly scapegoating that's happening of Asian Americans, especially amid the COVID-19 pandemic. So Pooja, could you speak to us about why we should be so alarmed, like why this is such a big deal, and especially given this longer history that Nick just laid out for us, including the Chinese Exclusion Act and the Japanese internment camps. And why does that make this moment particularly alarming?
Yes, thank you. So it's interesting because when I think about history, you know, I always look back and I think, how could they let that happen? I mean, how could people let that happen? And I realize today, you know, as I was thinking about this webinar, is we are letting. I mean, we're in this right now, and you know, people years from now are going to look back and think, how do we let this happen? How do we let this move forward? And so just to piggyback off of a few of the historical acts that Nick talked about earlier, and then I'll bring us to today. But the Chinese Exclusion Act, just so people know, started in 1882, and it was to prohibit the migration of Chinese laborers, and it lasted till 1943. And as an immigration attorney, it really more than hurts my heart, because it was the first time that the federal government or an act had ever been put out to stop a group of people from becoming citizens in the United States based on their race or where they come from. And a part of that just happened because, well, a part of that happened was because as gold was starting to decrease in the 1840s, they got scared about the competition that was happening over gold and resources in the United States. So their way of responding to that was through the Chinese Exclusion Act that happened back in 1882. So then fast forward in 1943, they stopped it, and everybody was grateful. But in 1942, then they started the Japanese internment camps, which lasted for 4 years during World War II. And 62% of those people in the internment camps were also United States citizens. And what's really important about that is because in the act that created the internment camps, it never actually said to put Japanese or Japanese Americans into the internment camps, but the way the act was created, that was the end result. So fast forward to today, we are seeing that there's a lot of talk about immigration and stopping immigration and the green cards right now. And it says that they are going to stop green cards for people who are working for 60 days. And I will say in the language that was being used, it said to save American workforce, to save American jobs because of what's happening during COVID-19 and how the economy is suffering. In order to save the American workforce, we're going to stop green cards for 60 days. What worries me is that they will find a way to continue that, to stop the green cards after 60 days. And that rhetoric that's being used to save the American workforce is very, very dangerous, because that's to say that people who have been here for 20 years on H-1Bs, which are typically a higher amount in the Asian population, are saying that they're not contributing to the American economy and not a part of the American workforce. Therefore, we're not going to give green cards. So the rhetoric that's being used, one, you know, for the laborers, and then on top of that, the rhetoric that's being used just about even the disease is really, really dangerous, and it's a way to scapegoat a community in order to take away some of the other statistics that we actually need to help move forward on this disease and help cure our communities. But you know, this happened before in 1900 with bubonic plague. It actually came over on a French ship, but because the first case was found in Chinatown in San Francisco, they started to blame the Chinese community at that time and actually shut down Chinatown because of that, and started to only quarantine the Chinese community. So this is something that historically we're seeing again and again. So this is not a new playbook that we're seeing by any means, but calling it the Chinese virus, the the Wuhan virus, or any of the other terms being thrown around by our officials are really dangerous. And what worries me, like I said, is that it could be something that leads to further scapegoating. And when our kids do go back to work, it's pretty dangerous.
Thanks, Pooja. It is really important for us to be able to understand this pattern, this historical pattern. And as we reckon with it, it means that we also have agency now to be able to do something about it. So I'm going to turn to Arati for this last question so that we can think about what we can do moving forward. So how then, given all of this, like, I mean, it's pretty heavy to process, and I know I have a hard time processing it myself, but given all of this history and the reckoning that we're doing, how can civic engagement be a response to this moment, these challenges, and what are the ways that we can show up at the table? And how can we all make a difference, even if we're not necessarily in elected office? Like, how do we, as just regular people, make a difference?
That's such a great question, because we can all do something. And I think that as, by the way, Pooja, I can totally relate to your story about your mom showing up in a sari. Happened to me too, and it was scarring. So yes, there is some shared history there. So I think in terms, when I was growing up, like I said, my family, my parents were immigrants. They were really just trying to survive and bring bring my relatives over from India. So there wasn't a lot of time for civic engagement growing up. And so I'm so grateful for them for doing what they did, so that I have this luxury. Like, I feel like this is a luxury that I get to be at where I am in the community and spend all this time doing this. And a lot of our immigrant families don't have that luxury. And so I understand that sometimes people can't do that, but there are simple things. If you're a citizen, you've got to vote. Like, that is the simplest thing that we can really do, is vote. If you can't vote, then try to get people that you really like elected. You can still go canvassing and things like that, making phone calls. But I think really within our communities, like, there's this concept of relational organizing. So I think just getting the word out, like telling your friends at dinner parties, hey, have you registered to vote? I that's how I learn about things, and that's how I try to do. My daughters are both taking Indian dance class, and I get on the little WhatsApp group and I'm like, you guys, don't forget to do your census, and they're like, there goes Arati again with her, stuff. But that's kind of what we've got to do, because relationships do matter. So I think these little reminders and just talking about, like, it is important, and modeling that, I think, is really important as well. In terms of like real, like, getting outside of your home and doing civic engagement that way, I think for the Asian American community, it's so important for us to align ourselves with other groups, like with the Hispanic community, with the African American community, LGBTQ plus community, all the other communities that are trying to do this, because this might be a cynical way of looking at things, but I sometimes think that there's like a divide and conquer mentality, among minority groups, and we've, and sometimes we buy into that. I have seen it with my own eyes, and it kind of makes my skin crawl when I see it. And so I'm just so grateful that Austin has a community that is more inclusive. Like, I see, just the fact that you have two Indian people, on this Asian American, like, I love that. Like, we are very diverse within ourselves. So we've got those barriers to overcome. And then on top of that, we have all these other minorities. And I'm so glad Austin is a place where we can come together. And I think we've got to just keep doing that. Even when you look at speaking of history, we just we're about to vote on a bilingual education policy in Austin ISD. And some of the biggest cases that helped develop bilingual education policy nationally comes out of San Francisco with Chinese American students. And we don't really think of bilingual education as being, you know, an Asian thing here in South Texas, or in Central Texas so much, but it really was. Like it started with a lot of different groups, with Germans, with, you know, Mexicans, but also with Chinese. And so I think that demonstrates the value of all of us sort of coming together as much as we can. And it requires parents to not be horrified when their kid tells them they want to be a teacher in Texas. You know, I think my parents were like, "What? You know, are you sure?" You know, thank God my sister's a doctor, so I always say, like, we even each other out. But I think a lot of it comes, you know, through just like parental expectations and saying, "Hey, you know, go for it," because again, I'm grateful to my parents. They paved their way, so I have the luxury to do what I love doing. I think I married the right guy, you know, who's super supportive. So I was born here in the US. My husband was born and raised in India, and people think that's absolutely crazy a lot of times. It's kind of like a social no-no. Um, Sometimes you know, my parents were like, "Are you sure he's not marrying you for a green card?" And I'm like, you know, I know we're not. But so I think, you know, looking within our community and being around people who support our dreams and wanting to be civically engaged is super important. And forums like this help us do that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Arati. Yeah, I think what you just raised as well about the divide and conquer mentality, it's hard to process too, because part of that is, you know, reckoning with our own internalized racism and the ways that we have to reckon with how we actually see ourselves in our stories, and not seeing ourselves even like through the dominant narrative. And then to be able to claim your story from based on your lived experience. And so I just really appreciate all three of you for sharing your own lived experience, and it means a lot to hear not only your stories, but what we can do to actually empower just not only ourselves, but our communities, and that we have the power to do that, no matter what we may think about ourselves. I think that one of the most harmful myths about Asian American Pacific Islanders is that model minority myth that has really exacerbated the divide and conquer mentality, and it really pits the minorities against each other, even within the Asian community. And it's just, you know, that a lot of that has to be reckoned from within, and it's a lot of reflection that calls for. And so I really appreciate all three of you for being here today. So I'm seeing here, I think maybe that because it's a lot to take in, I'm not seeing any questions right now from our viewers, but for those who do want to submit questions or comments, please do so. And in the meantime, as we start to come to a close, I wanted to actually come back to this a sort of celebratory moment as we celebrate AAPI Heritage Month, and to ask each of you, what are your hopes for the future? What are your hopes for the AAPI community? So maybe, Arati, we'll begin with you, and then we'll move on.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think my hopes for the AAPI community is that we continue to build bridges with amongst ourselves. As I mentioned earlier, we are a very diverse community. You know, even within Indians, you know, growing up, they're like the North Indians, and then there's like the South Indians, and I'm Gujarati, so then they're like the Gujaratis over here. And so it's like, you know, so I think it's really interesting I think it's great. We have a good opportunity right now to just come together and see our commonalities, and then also continue that with other groups as well. And you know, especially like as a school board trustee, I think there was some hesitation around some folks when I was thinking about running, because they're like, well, you're just going to represent the Asian American kids, and like AISD is like 4% Asian American, and I'm like, no, I'm advocating for all kids, you know. And so I think we need, you know, it's up to us to show that we advocate for all people, and that is really my biggest hope for our community.
Thank you, Arati. How about you, Nick? What are your hopes for our community, and what are your hopes moving forward as we reflect on this this shared history and experience?
Yeah, I think you know, that probably my biggest hope for our community is that we continue this drive of inclusivity that we have kind of we're at the cusp of. You know, whether it is increased participation in our government, our business, or our community activism, I hope that our community is woken up by the simple fact that if we don't participate, then others make that decision and we continue to be a voice. And so I think my big dream for our community is that our voice isn't just you know, a small afterthought of people. Oh, hey, well, we need to include the Asians too, or things like that. But I want us to be at the forefront of conversations and to make sure that our issues, which are very similar, if not the same, as many different communities, gets heard in our decision making, whether that's business or government or even at our schools.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you so much. How about you, Pooja? What are the hopes that you have as we move forward? Let me see. I'm having trouble unmuting you at the moment.
I got it.
Oh, great.
So many hopes, but I will say, and kind of going back a little bit to what I was saying before, is that it really took Representative Judy Chu to come into, you know, an elected position and really do a resolution that kind of said that the Chinese Exclusion Act, the internment camps and everything were really horrible. So it really took that representation for, you know, somebody to come out, you know, for the Asian community. And I have so many hopes, and so I feel so good about seeing our next generation, because, you know, as much as people, mine and Nick's and Arthi's, I'm just assuming we're all the same age or close to the same age. You know, as much as so many of us and you guys are working, I just see the next generation even further, you know, being active and standing up, and parents really pushing their kids to be active in the community. I mean, in my family, both my sisters are doctors and my brother-in-law, and I was kind of the black sheep by becoming a lawyer and an immigration civil rights attorney at that. So, you know, but my parents still love me. But, you know, I see the next generation and really coming up and really being active. So I want to push for all of us to be more engaged and to fight more. And, you know, like Nick and Arati said, is really fighting for what, you know, for equity and equality, because we're not always included. You know, we have some issues that are very specific to the Asian community. One, where we don't all look the same. We don't all speak the same language. We don't all speak the same food. You know, translation, you know, when you're giving money or funding towards translation services to the Asian community, that includes so many languages. So giving the same amount of money to our community is very, it doesn't go as far. So I will say, I hope that, you know, as we stand up for the Asian community and we really understand the needs of the Asian community, and just keep pushing for our generation and for the next generation. Thanks.
Really appreciate that, Pooja. So as y'all have shared your hopes, we have now some questions from our viewers that I'm going to then give back to you. So our first question is from Angela Kong. She's actually our UT Outreach Coordinator, who as part of the AACCC. So Thank you for joining us, Angela. And Angela's question is, I love this conversation about the hopes for our community. How do y'all foresee the future of civic engagement and relation building in a world where a lot of organizing might have to happen online? So is anyone willing to take this one?
Well, I think that that part of the Asian American community, just from the fact that some of us have that ability and are kind of savvy enough to figure out online stuff, whether it's the fact that some of us have that exposure to technology, or whether people are drawn to certain classes or those types of opportunities. But also, I think part of the conversation that is missed too is that a large part of our Asian American community doesn't have that access. Either generationally, they don't really get the technology aspect of it, or that they're immigrants, or that they don't meet a certain income level to where they have that ability. So I think our natural trend will be, oh, okay, we could figure this out, and let's do this via certain apps or organized through Facebook or emails or things like that. But I think that as we kind of push for online organizing, especially during these times, part of that conversation still has to be made of realizing that a large part of our community, and an important part of our community, doesn't have that access, and we'll probably have to figure out ways to organize with them, whether it is some way of training or some going back to traditional ways for that group or something like that. So I think that will be kind of present a challenge with our online organizing.
Yeah, definitely. This moment for sure is also a reckoning about how to be mindful of equity and equitable access. So for sure, that is a challenge that I think that is a task for our community for sure. So our next question is actually, given the context, we actually, a part of our viewership right now is a group of interns who are going to be working on the census with us this summer. We're so excited that they have joined. Do y'all have some advice for them as they move into the future and get involved in civic engagement and have taken the initiative to do this internship program with us? So any advice that you have, that would be wonderful. If anyone
I can start. I would say don't assume everyone knows. I had assumed that my own parents had taken the census because I post about it constantly. And when I call them, they're like, oh, we haven't done it yet. And I hope my mom doesn't see this. She probably will, but that's fine. So I don't think we should take anyone for granted. My friend Ashley Chang recently did a really great some relational organizing recently, where she got census bags, and her dad owns a restaurant. And so she has those relationships with restaurants, and they got census bags and flyers and delivered a bunch to different restaurants to hand out to people. So I think just kind of being creative, especially this day and age where everything is online or not as much person to person, being really creative. And, I think, no, I don't take any idea off the table, because these days we're all kind of working through this. So it's, just go where your mind takes you and see how it works out. So yeah, but I don't think that we should just assume that everyone's taken the census. I don't think that it should be assumed. I think just bring it up as much as possible, even if you might annoy family members about it. So yeah.
Yes, I agree. Don't be afraid to be annoying to family members. So our final question, we do actually have a plethora of questions now, but in the last couple of minutes remaining, I do want to pose one last question from our viewers about how we typically, I mean, this is part of the sort of maybe internalizing the stereotypes as well, but we typically tend towards certain like career trajectories that are like acceptable, or quote unquote acceptable. How about, how do, especially if we're, you know, let's say if there are students who are studying, who are like going towards like comp sci or engineering or math, and for those who want to go into social studies or the humanities or the, you know, pursue teaching or like a different path, like what kind of advice would you give them as they move forward? Because it takes a lot of courage to go that way.
So I'll take this one. So I was a psychology major and a Spanish minor. And my parents are very proud of me now, but they were not excited when I was in college about my choices. And I guess I think the question was, what is your advice? My advice would be, you know, do what you love, but also be realistic, because you know, someone still has to pay the rent and, you know, do all that kind of stuff. And you know, my daughter's in college and I'm sort of half forcing her to minor in computer science. So I can't get away from it, you know? So you know, I'm like, you can major in whatever you want, but you should minor in computer science so you can get a job. So I'm guilty of it too. But, you know, we really have to we really do. I would just advise you to get mentors. You know, go on LinkedIn and look at people who have majored in what you've majored in at your universities and see what kind of jobs they have. Or look for people on LinkedIn who have the dream job that you would want, and look at like what they majored in, what they went to school in, and the path that they took. And you'll probably find there's going to be multiple ways that you can get to what you want to do. I think the people who you know and connect with is just as important as what you major in. You know, so use that network, whether it's the Asian network or not. Get some mentors and you're going to be fine. Stay true to yourself. Do not go to med school if you don't want to be a doctor. I actually know several Asian people who have MDs who are not doctors now, and I'm like, wow, like that. You know, we really need to be true to yourself through this process. Call me if you need some advice. I'm happy to talk anyone out of an engineering degree.
Thank you, Arati. And thank you everyone so much. So as we come to a close, I do want to, you know, echo everything that y'all have already been saying, which is to be true to yourself and to be courageous. Be courageous in taking these next steps to show up for not only for yourself, but your community. And I want to remind everyone that this month, PBS is having a pretty special documentary series on May 11 and 12 called Asian Americans. And it's the powerful retelling of American history through an Asian American lens. I'm really excited to watch it. It's on May 11 and 12 at 7 Central. So please tune in for that. And for those of you who haven't yet taken your census, it's hard to have a webinar given our context to not remind everyone to take your census if you haven't done so. You can do it by going online at my2020census.gov and check with your friends and family to see if they've taken it once you've done it yourself. So we are here as a resource. Please contact us, the Austin Nation Complete Count Committee, with any questions. We would love to hear from you. You can also visit our website at aaccc.atx.org. Okay, thank you everyone, and we will see you next time. And thank you to our special guests for joining us today for this conversation. Take care.
Thanks for having us.